Hello and welcome to this month's Georgia Wednesday webinar series, co-hosted by the Georgia Library Association and the Georgia Public Library Service. I'm Sarah Steiner at Georgia State University, and I co-host this series with the fabulous Buffy Hamilton of Creekview High School. The series aims to highlight trends, innovation, and best practices in Georgia's academic, public, and school libraries. And while the focus is on highlighting Georgia speakers and programs, the webinars are open to anyone, anywhere, so please bring a friend to our upcoming sessions. I'm excited to introduce you to Elisabeth Shields today. Elisabeth is the research librarian for the Enterprise Innovation Institute, the economic development arm of Georgia Tech. In this position, she works with her colleagues to help businesses and communities use technology to become more competitive, creating and keeping better jobs in Georgia. Elisabeth is a former international development worker with a PhD in international relations as well as an MLS. Thanks for being with us, Elisabeth, today. Take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I've really been looking forward to the opportunity to do this. One of the reasons I got so interested in personal knowledge management is because I work with a set of people who are really quite good at searching and very highly focused on what they do. They're highly educated and they typically have no problem collecting information, and so that's why I've called this session Beyond Information Collection, because really the problem that I was helping them deal with when I first got here, still am in fact, and my problem in fact was that we were all searching for tools to help us process this stuff, and yes, that's the technical term. And so that's why I started looking at tools for personal knowledge management. We were just overwhelmed by all the information that we had to deal with. So at around the same time as I was starting this job, and this might have been 2003 or 2004, the National Science Foundation funded a University of Washington project called Keeping Found Things Found. Don't you love that name? I've always wished that I had come up with that myself. But the Keeping Found Things Found project looked at many of the issues that people have in organizing their information and how especially they refined things once they had already found them, especially on the web. And I learned a lot from the questions that were asked by this project. So I hope that this session will give you ideas about tools for handling your own information and knowledge, and that you may also be able to recommend tools to your clients, students, people you work with, friends, family, and even neighbors. And I know that you'll discover more tools, and I hope that you'll let me know your experiences. And please notice that we will make available to you my contacts, my email address, and my phone number, because this was supposed to have an interactive conversation part, and I still look very much forward to having exchanges with people about that. So having said that, this is what I hope to do today. First of all, what is personal knowledge management? What are the gaps that it fills? Because once we look at that, we can understand what the tools are, what would we be looking for in the tools that we would want to use for this. And my emphasis here is on free and cheap, because after all, this is personal. So what are some general considerations in evaluating tools that you would use for personal knowledge management? And then what are some types of tools that you could use for personal knowledge management? We will also look at individual instances of tools, but I find it helps me if I think about categories of tools. And then, as I said, we will look at some examples of each type of tool. So starting with what is personal knowledge management. And Sarah, since you're here with me, if you would like to try to respond using chat or anything else to any of these kinds of questions, or have ideas that you want to throw in or questions you would like answered, please feel free to do that. Normally I ask the audience at this point, and Sarah's the audience I have right now. So I find that it can help to think about personal knowledge management in contrast to big KM, if you like, which is institutional or organizational knowledge management, or how it's different from personal information management. Now, I really don't want to get hung up on information versus knowledge. But personal knowledge management is about more than managing information that can be handled in ordinary database programs, say information that can be easily stored in fields like contact or citation data. So, for example, when I mention personal knowledge management, I've had people say, oh, I already have a program that takes care of my contacts. But well over 90% of the information we deal with comes to us as qualitative data that's messy, and it's not amenable to being tamed into fields. And so in addition to our personal information, we have this other messier kind of information and input that we need to deal with, and we need to find ways to be able to not just collect this, but filter it and do other things with it so that we end up transforming it into knowledge ultimately. And that's the kind of thing that I expect some help with from personal knowledge management tools. Now, Big KM, or institutional knowledge management, as usually practiced, is an organizational level system for keeping track of knowledge and information that needs to be shared. So often these are completed documents or group project related material like task lists and calendars, meeting agendas and minutes, documents that are being authored by groups, organizational regulations and forms, and so on. At the Enterprise Innovation Institute, we use SharePoint. And while you can develop ways to manage personal knowledge, for example, by using the wiki functions or even blogs that are purely personal, it's not that friendly an environment, and you don't own it in the end. And we'll come back to this point, which is really important. So having said that, that will allow us to consider what personal knowledge management tools will do for us. So going back to a little bit more, what are some of the things that personal knowledge management tools could do for you? Well, you should be able to store your personal information there. For example, contacts and passwords and account numbers and things like that. Your personal knowledge management system should also be a portal to all of your stuff, including files and things that you've found on the web. So this is the keeping found things found aspect of it. And of course, one reason this is a problem is because the stuff is scattered in different media and programs. So you've got information in email and voicemail and spreadsheets and text documents, in attachments to email, and so on. And one of the problems is, how do you remember whether you downloaded and saved the attachment to an email, or whether it's still in your inbox as an attachment to email, or is it in a folder? So keeping track of the things that come at you from many directions is really important, but there's even more than that. It's also processing and playing with ideas and making sense of things. So a really long time ago, when I was doing my dissertation in the 80s, that's when personal computers first became fairly common, and of course there were word processors. But I had heard of a program called an idea processor, and it was trying to do what some of the personal knowledge management tools now do in terms of helping you take individual granular ideas and make something more out of them. And so there was one, and I wanted to find out if there were more, so I would go around and talk to people about this, and I would say, have you heard of something called an idea processor? And they said, oh, you meant word processors. And I was like, no. But, I was just a girl and, not very really tech savvy in some ways, and so I wasn't getting anywhere with this question, and that publisher actually went under, and it wasn't really for another almost 20 years that these things started coming back, because at the time people just said, oh, well, you can do that in a word processor. Well, no, you really can't, because what is it that you really need to do. You want to process and you want to play with ideas. You want to try to make sense of things. So you filter and you organize and you reorganize and you play around with ideas, ideas that are yours and ideas that you found externally. So typical activities are things like storing and organizing. You typically won't have RSS feeds deliver information directly to your personal knowledge management tools. You would select information from what you've collected, the best of it, the things that you want to work on more and remember more. And you'll also capture your own thoughts here. Some of you may know David Allen, the inventor of the Getting Things Done system. For some people, this is like a religion. And what Alan said was that all of us are drowning in the ideas that we generate for ourselves, the thoughts that we have, and we're anxious because we're afraid we won't remember these things, we won't remember to follow up on them and do them and implement them. And his solution was write it down. And he doesn't care whether you do this with pen and paper or digitally, but he says write it down, and then he has a lot of ideas about how you actually should process this, particularly when it's tasks and goals. And so if you want to read Getting Things Done and lots of the discussion and literature around that, that is help with the method of dealing with all these ideas that you may have. And what I'm going to talk about mainly is really the tools that help you process the information, not the thinking part of it really. So another thing besides capturing is keeping track of the information, which is sort of the keeping things found project. And then there are the sense-making activities. This is really the idea processing. So there's a lot of unfinished stuff in your personal knowledge management system, things that you aren't ready to share yet. One person's contribution to the discussion of personal knowledge management was that really it's ridiculous to talk about personal knowledge. He said all knowledge is social. And I think that that's really true in the sense that without discussion and the stimulation of other ideas and contrast and comparison, it wouldn't be possible to really develop knowledge. And yet, on the other hand, it's also clearly true that at certain stages, your thoughts are your own, and you really need a time and a space and a way to mull them over and to play with them and reflect on them at a stage when they're just not ready yet to be shared with other people. And that, again, is part of what personal knowledge management and tools for personal knowledge management are all about. So sense-making activities are dealing with this unfinished stuff that's not ready to share yet. It's arranging ideas and information in different ways. It's using taxonomies, existing ones and your own. It's playing with connections and relationships. It's commenting on existing ideas. And it's generating new ideas. And then finally, part of it is about generating new knowledge. And this is where you're transforming existing information, both your own ideas and other people's ideas, into something new. So you can see, I think, that a lot of this for me is, it has a certain element of playfulness in it. And so that's why I like this, I like this jigsaw puzzle image here, the create, idea, and think. And so part of what you should be doing is really playing around, reorganizing, switching things around, being able to get them into new perspectives and bring them back to the way they were and maybe keep both of them without much trouble. And that, to me, is sort of the essence of the transformational element of what you should be able to do with personal knowledge management tools. So with that as background, with those as some of the tasks and the expectations I would have, the things that I want tools to help me with, here are some things that I suggest you think about when you're looking at a tool. To see whether you want to acquire it or start using it. Because even if a tool is free, there's a lot of time that you have to invest in putting information into it and learning the tool to the point where you know whether it's really going to be helpful for you. And so as I said already, free and cheap. That's what I'm looking for, because these are personal. And my policy is I want to own it. I don't want my employer to pay for it for me. Initially, I did have Georgia Tech buy some of these things for me, but right now I am actually, most of the ones that I use are altogether free, but the ones that I do pay for, I pay for myself. I don't want there to be any question about the portability of that tool. Wherever I go, it goes with me. So first of all, there are no magic bullets. And what I mean by this is each type of software and each individual package has strengths and weaknesses. And so they're better for some things than others. And also, each piece of software is a work in progress. So later versions can be worse than earlier ones, and we will see, in fact, one program which is an example of that, or at least in some people's opinions. And of course, none of them thinks for you. Now, some of these look a little bit complicated, and they have many function buttons, and they're very interesting to look at. And I work with engineers at Georgia Tech, and when I do demonstrations of some of these tools, some of them look at them and they get really intrigued by them, and at the end, I've been asked, show me the function key that shows the answer. Well, I don't need to tell you, it doesn't work that way. Secondly, there isn't a best tool. When I first started looking at personal knowledge management, I did want to find the one package that would solve all my problems. And there was one and only one PKM guru at the time, and he said, no, that's not realistic. I didn't want to hear that at the time, and I resisted for a few more years, and then I finally had to admit that he's right. There are many different types of activities and many different types of materials, and they need different approaches. And in an analogy with maybe a kitchen implement of some kind, something that does many different functions doesn't do any of those functions as well as a dedicated tool does it. So for example, SharePoint has both a blogging function and a wiki function, but the built-in blog is nowhere near as good as WordPress, for example, or many other dedicated blogging tools, nor is the built-in wiki anywhere near as good as wikis that are dedicated wiki software. And although you can, for example, in a tool that's made for organizing academic articles, there are other things that you can do with that tool. It probably won't be as good for displaying visual material as something that is specifically dedicated to displaying material in a visual fashion, obviously. Third point, although I started this several years ago when really there was a big gap between personal tools and shared tools, although I'm talking about this mainly for personal knowledge management, do consider how you will share material that you store in these programs, because in the intervening time, some of these actually have become quite adept at being shared. And also in the intervening time, I mean, these days we pretty much expect to be able to share things, and some of these tools have caught up as well. Then the final 3 points are points about the publishers themselves. So number one is, will the publisher last? Personal knowledge management, and especially visual knowledge managers, have become a hot area in the last 3 years or so. And it seems like a new program comes out every month at least. So people out there use what's out there and they see how they could improve it, and some of them actually decide to publish and make their own tools. Well, if the publisher goes under, and this is the second point, you have to see how easy will it be to get your data or your information out of that tool. So if it's tied up in a proprietary format, obviously you'll have a much harder time doing that. So when you're choosing these tools, look at those two things. Look at the publisher's credentials. You know, how many other projects has this person brought to completion? What kind of backing does the project have? How long has it already been around? Longevity is good. On the other hand, a program that has maybe been the market leader for a very long time may actually become complacent and lose its edge, as we know. So there are many different considerations, and obviously you can't know what the future will bring, but do be a little bit cautious, especially in adopting something that is brand new and untested. And then finally, will the software program continue to be free and cheap? And it's obviously extremely difficult to know this, but sometimes by looking at the nature of the project, you can tell this, and we'll look at a couple of these, and I think you'll be able to see what to expect. And I do want to come back to that point before we leave this, of who owns the software. And not just who owns the software, but who owns the ideas in it. Excuse me. This has been discussed a little bit more recently in personal knowledge management discussions. You're probably, if you're a librarian, you're collecting things at work, and researchers are doing the same. And so when does the employer own this information, and when do you own this information? Certainly, if your employer has commissioned you to produce an article or a presentation or a report, and you are preparing that in your personal knowledge manager, then your employer probably owns quite a lot of that. But to the extent that you are collecting this as byproduct of your work and combining it with your own ideas, it's being suggested more and more in the literature that really employers are just going to have to understand that that this also goes with you, at least when it's not proprietary information that clearly belongs to the employer. Now let's take a look at the types of tools. I discovered that there were so many tools out there, even 6 or 7 years ago when I started this, that I really had to develop some categories in order for me to be able to figure out what different types of tools are good for, and also so that I could compare apples to apples. So this is what I came up with, and I really have been content with these over the years. First of all, junk drawers. Like a physical junk drawer, this is easy to put stuff in, but unlike your physical junk drawer, at least unlike my physical junk drawer, it's also easy to get things out. Notebooks, this should be a familiar metaphor, at least I think that for most of us we were still using physical notebooks when we were students in the K-12 system. Article organizers. These are programs meant primarily to store and comment on reading materials, such as published articles in journals and reports. And then information or knowledge mappers. These use spatial relationships to boost understanding in a way that goes beyond what text can do. And now let's take a deeper look at each of these categories and also at some examples within each of the categories. So junk drawers, as I said, are easy in and easy out. It's less sophisticated organization than other types by and large. In part because really all you have to do is capture the information and sling it in there. You do have to do a little bit more organizing in general to get it out again. And there really is a market leader here. It's called Evernote, and it's ruled this category for a very long time. Oh, thanks, Sarah, for putting up the Evernote link. I do have these in the references at the end, and I want to make sure that I have time to go over those references with you as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, since this is such an important a piece of software here. I want to say that normally when I do this live, I actually have live databases that I can show people. This is the first time that I've done this with screenshots. And so I hope that you will be able to get a good enough sense of what these databases do from the screenshots. I think that everything that I'm going to show you here does offer a free at least 30-day trial. So this is what you see when you open an Evernote database. The menu, just let me get my tool back here. So the menu and the search box are across the top. Sarah, are you seeing the little demonstration tool there that shows you what you're looking at? Okay, thanks. One of the features that made Evernote preeminent originally was it had an incredibly fast keyword search. 6 or 7 years ago, it was something that people just absolutely raved about because nothing else searched as fast. Today, of course, everybody else has copied it, and it's just standard. So it still is an incredibly fast keyword searcher. And so one of the ways that people retrieve things in here is by doing keyword searches. And it does that extremely fast. As you type, it's retrieving anything that matches your keyword search. So we have a note showing here, and there are different ways you can arrange the panes. This particular note is a web clipping. Evernote does fabulous web clippings from, they try to keep up with all different browsers. It also stores video and audio clips, photos from your cell phone, handwriting, and voicemail messages. Now notice that I have put in here the source. Harold Jarsch does a blog on personal knowledge management now, and he is also in our reference list. With Evernote, there are machine-based and a web-based version, and they're all free. There is also a premium subscription-based version. I have used the free version for possibly close to 10 years now. I have never felt any need for the subscription-based version. In fact, I can't even tell you what the premium features are. So the recommended way to use Evernote is to set up a web account. Then you install the machine versions on all the computers and devices that you want to use it with. That way you can sync the material on your machines via the web account. Now originally this was machine-based, and there are longtime users who really regret the additional complexity that Evernote has now acquired. Now some other things to notice on this page is that, first of all, by default, Evernote stores things in chronological order, which is what you see in this pane at the top. Also, the organizing features are demonstrated on the left here. So one level is the notebooks, the different notebooks that you see here. And within notebooks you have these notes, which are over here. And then you assign tags, which are shown here. And as I hope you can see, the tags can be nested within each other so that you can have a hierarchy of tags. And you can search by tags or by an intersection of 2 or more tags. What you can't see in this particular screenshot is something called attributes. Attributes are pre-assigned features of notes that Evernote assigns automatically. And so these are things like the date a note was created, the date it was last edited, whether it contains handwriting, whether it contains images. And these actually can be quite useful in retrieving notes when keyword searches and tag searches and date searches fail. One of the things that Evernote's publishers are really trying to do is to go after the mobile market and the busy executive, student, and other people on the go. So Evernote works with a number of phones, for example, and other mobile devices. And one of the very popular uses of this is to take pictures with your cell phone and then store those images in Evernote. So you can take pictures of whiteboards. If you're collecting images for a design project, for example. That's another thing that you would take photos of and store in here. And so you can store voicemail messages. This is a premier program for people who are very connected to their mobile devices. You can also view it on cell phones and various other mobile devices like iPads, and they make a conscious effort to keep up with new devices coming into the market. One of the things that I love about Evernote is that there's a certain level of encryption. So, for example, I wouldn't trust it with my financial passwords, but I do store my university ID, which, I have to change the password every 3 months, and you can't repeat passwords. So I would go crazy if I had to, make up a new password every 3 months and never repeat them and not be able to write them down where I can get to them from different machines that I use. So the encryption in Evernote is wonderful for that. For different subscriptions that I have, say to the New York Times and the Financial Times and other things like that, I find it very useful. Evernote can also be a good portal to your files. It links to PDFs and to other files as well as to sites on the web. And this is the way that a lot of students and educators use it, especially K-12 students. Again, if you're capturing a lot of stuff by a camera from your phone, this works really well, I think easier than other software that I'm going to show here. So I've used this for a number of years. I'm a pretty light user. I use it mainly for information and not really for what I would call knowledge management. But I do have things in here like phone numbers and contacts. I clip every receipt for something that I buy online and put it in here because it is so easy to capture things in their original form as web clippings. And I expect to continue to use Evernote, in part because this is a legacy program for me. I've used it this way for a very long time. I think other people might begin to capture these things and maybe use fewer programs. But, I find it fairly lightweight, and Sarah likes it too, and I see that Buffy uses it with students as well for projects. So it certainly has a number of really, really dedicated users. So on to notebooks. Here, OneNote, Microsoft's OneNote is the king. And OneNote and Evernote are quite often compared. But I find there's really a significant difference between a notebook like OneNote and something like Evernote. And there's a lot more visual cues to the organization in OneNote, for example, than there are in Evernote. Notebooks try to recreate online the physical notebook. And so you'll notice here that there are tabs which lend one level of organization. Within each tab, there are pages. You also see over here on the left, it's a little less noticeable, but different notebooks can be open at the same time, creating another level of organization. And then it's still a little bit harder to see, but there's something called group tabs. So within research, if I opened that, you would see a number of different tabs just like you see here. And in fact, I do have a group tab open here. So OneNote, well, the first thing to say about OneNote is its big deficiency. There is no version for Mac. It is strictly Windows. However, even people who hate Microsoft acknowledge that this is a peerless program and that there's nothing similar or nothing that comes even close for Mac. There are competitors, but they have far fewer features. They're far less powerful. And OneNote also comes in most Microsoft Student and Office 2007 packages. I believe that all versions of Office 2010 include OneNote. So it's the hidden free personal knowledge management tool that most Microsoft users, Office users have, and they don't know about. It is intuitive enough so that you can use it out of the box, but you certainly will, it really pays to learn a little bit about it and learn to use its advanced features. One of the other tricky things that I have found is you need to think carefully about where you'll set it up, especially if you think you'll ever want to share the contents. It's very difficult to move because it's really a complex nest of different files. If you use it for collaboration, it works best either on a shared drive or on SharePoint. And it is a wonderful collaboration tool. One of the great things about it is that not only can multiple people have it open at the same time, but they actually can be editing it at the same time, and you can see each other's changes in real time. Now, this notebook is actually really more of a team notebook than a personal knowledge management notebook, you'll see. OneNote, like Evernote, handles many media, so text, handwriting, images, web capture, audio, and video. Since it's a Microsoft product, web capture probably works smoothest with Explorer, but it does also work with other browsers. And then, of course, you can link to other documents, or you can insert documents into the notebooks. And as you can see here, I have a rather simple table in here. I've never really used a very complicated one, so I don't know how complicated they can get. And I love the tags in OneNote. So on the right side here, you can see that I've already done a tag search. There are default tags, but you can also set up your own. And so, for example, the default tags tend to be things like critical, which has a little eye-popping icon so that you'll be sure to see it, and task for person A, or discuss with person A, or phone call, or things like that. But you can certainly make up your own, and you can color code them so that if you will recognize the colors, you'll kind of know what they are. If you can associate them mentally with tasks, I'm not really very good at that. Another feature that I just love is what's called the side note. And this you can use with other programs. What it is, when you invoke this feature, you bring up a note taker that you can place anywhere on the screen, but I tend to place it on the right-hand side. And so when I'm reading a report or an article, I will actually be taking notes about that simultaneously as I'm reading it in this side note. And then by default, it's filed under unfiled notes, which is down here, and it's always open. And so then you can move it to any place you want to store it in any of your notebooks after you've dumped it there. And it is very, very easy to move things around. You can either move them or copy them, so you can move them from one page to another, from one tab to another, from groups of tabs and into different notebooks. And I have to say that a Microsoft notebook, for me, is limited more by what I can see in terms of the organization, in terms of these group tabs and pages and notebooks, rather than what it can really hold. Because I like to be able to have a sense of, I like to be able to see the organization, rather than to always have to search for things. I like to, so for example, I won't put 20 tabs, even though it can hold 20 tabs here. I will instead try to create more groups of tabs, for example. But I have never exhausted the limits of what can be held on a page or within a tab. It seems to be able to hold just absolutely enormous amounts of information. And so, the next type of program that I'm going to look at is article organizers. article organizers have typically been designed for academics, and they do go beyond citation management programs in the sense that they actually save the articles, and they aim to do what you could do with an article that you print out. So with such an article, you would highlight it, you would scribble comments in the margin, and in the old days, of course, we annotated things by taking note cards and writing notes about our articles on those note cards. And so you can do all of those things in these article organizers. And the two most widely used ones, the most established ones at this point, are Zotero, which only works with Firefox, and Mendeley. And I use Zotero, so that's the one I'm going to show you. First of all, you notice that I was in ISI Web of Knowledge when I did this. Now, one of the limitations of Zotero is that it only works with Firefox. It will only ever work with Firefox, which is one of the reasons why competitors to it arose. It is being developed at George Mason University with foundation support. And so I think that this is likely to always be available. Sarah says that she's heard it will be available in other browsers. That would be good. I've heard this on occasion in the past, and then it's turned out not to be true. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for this one, Sarah. So you'll notice that the actual Zotero part of the screen is this kind of pinkish part here. And that the basic organization is by folders and subfolders, which you see over here. You'll see that I do have a few tags here. And then in the middle, you have the articles within a folder organized in various ways, alphabetically by author, in reverse chronological order that you put them in, or chronological order that you put them in, and other ways. And then over here on the right, you have the actual various sets of information about the article. What you're seeing right here is the citation information, and all of these are set up to recognize or to accept citation information from many, many item types, from books and articles to videos, films, letters, emails, and audio broadcasts. And they try to work with as many publishers as possible, publishers of databases that is, to recognize the citation database, the citation information automatically in the database and grab that for you. If they don't, you can enter it manually as well within the pre-set up fields for the item type. But the real utility for me has been that I can store, you can actually take snapshots of the articles and store them either in Zotero or Mendeley or as links. And so I keep my reading piles here because it's so easy to capture the articles in their original format, and you know, to keep them organized, and then to comment on them, which I'm going to show you in a minute. You can write a note, as you see here. You can write a note on the individual article. You can tag the article, and you can cross-reference articles to each other, which is very useful. Now, online, both Zotero and I think Mendeley have established features where you can initiate groups or communities of scholars who are sharing their references and building comprehensive bibliographies in different subject areas. And Zotero, at least, also has online forums where users give each other assistance, and you can also expect assistance from their technical people. So in the next slide, this is an article that I have saved, and I could have highlighted it, which I'm not showing you here, but notice that I have inserted the equivalent of a marginal comment by using this kind of sticky note feature. Now, I've only been able to do this because this I did not save as a PDF. It was available as HTML. When articles are available only as PDFs, that's PDF format, and you really can't do anything such as highlighting it or writing notes in the margin. You can write notes about notes attached to the article about it. I'm going to go back just for a moment. It's not that easy to see here, but you can write freestanding notes that are not attached to a particular article, which is another feature, and it is a rich text format editor. So again, you can be writing fairly complicated notes to yourself here that are reasonably well formatted. And now we're moving on to an area that to me is most exciting. It's the one that is perhaps growing fastest. It is the one that has the most subcategories, as you can see here, and these are called knowledge mappers or information mappers. And because the name knowledge mapper would have the acronym KM, which we know is already taken for knowledge management, some people in this field have taken to calling it knowledge cartography, which is certainly a heavy name suggesting very deep and heavy academic influences on it. But really the reason for that is simply because the KM acronym for knowledge mapping was already taken. And certainly the category here, the subcategory that is most known to people is MindMappers. And mind mapping really is a very old activity. You certainly don't need software to do it. It's been around for a very long time, but it was reinvented in the 1960s by a fellow named Tony Buzan, and he really thought of it as a study method for K-12 education, and as opposed to just writing out notes as text. And so the whole idea here is that you use visual placement and relationships between ideas to reinforce relationships and concepts in a way that simple text cannot. And as you see, of the several subtypes here, some of them are kind of specialized. I suppose some librarians may find their use a bit far-fetched in librarianship, but I do think it's worth being aware of them. Librarians have so many roles, from teaching to planning, and I have found some of these very helpful. And honestly, this is what I find most exciting, really. So, MindMappers, and I'll be showing you some of these in just a minute. In fact, let's go on right now to an example of this. So Cyplor is a free mind mapper. Cyplor is an open source tool. It's an extension of a mind mapper called FreeMind, which is much more famous. Cyplor has been developed for scientists and academics. And so, like most mind mappers, you can link to websites and to files. And notice that mind mappers typically are either they have a central node or they have a top of a hierarchy. And most of them, at least the free ones, are strictly hierarchical. So you have the center, and then you have these radiating branches. And branches can have children, and children can have children. But you can't have connections from one branch to another, for example. So each idea or concept can only have one parent. Now, there are a lot of mind maps sold for good money into the business market, and some of these do have more advanced features such as multiple parents and lateral relationships. But again, because I'm looking chiefly at free and cheap tools, most of those are strictly hierarchical. The thing that makes SciPolar interesting and why I decided to show this particular one to you is it was developed for the academic community, and its particular feature is that you can link to reference keys in PDFs, which is a very convenient feature. It's not one that I use very much, but some of our students I know do. Now, the next subtype of knowledge mappers I call network mappers. And network mappers can have connections every which way, really. They can have, any idea or concept can have multiple parents, and there can be lateral relationships. And normally, of course, when you have lines going every which way, they can get extremely messy. Well, Personal Brain is another one of these tools that I've used for about 10 years, and it is unique, and I do not use the word unique often. This is the one tool that I pay for. It's not that expensive. It is a couple $100, but there is an educational discount, and I think it's well worth it. I use it for two main types of things. This is where I put my own collection of reference resources. And so if I have a resource that I want to file under both Georgia and statistics and economics, I can do that because I can have one source that has all of those parents. What you're seeing in this screenshot, however, is my adaptation of our org chart. And I'll say right away, you are not actually seeing real names and the real organization structure of the Enterprise Innovation Institute. This is obviously a dummy database. But I have replicated the org chart in here with people's names, and I attach to them projects they're working on, things that I have agreed to research for them, or literatures that I have agreed to follow for them and inform them when something new comes up. One of my tasks is to train people to use Georgia Tech's library databases. And so, for example, I've color-coded people according to whether I've done that with them or not. So I can see at a glance, who do I still need to approach about this and work with on this? And so the unique thing about Personal Brain is that it dynamically recenters every time you click on an item in here. So right now what we're looking at is Brad White and his connections. And you can see he and Olive are both managed by Donna. Now Bill is not. Bill has another manager, Martina. But Bill and Brad have a lateral connection because they work together, and you'll see down here in my note that Brad has worked with Bill on several proposals to the NIH. And notice that this note field is displayed right there on the screen. Again, it's rich text formatted. Every idea in here can have properties, multiple attachments, tags, and many other features of it. Notice that the search box is right here. You can do rather sophisticated Boolean searches in here. And in addition to searching the actual words in the map and the words in the notes field, Personal Brain also searches words in the attachments, which makes it very, very powerful indeed. So the next shot I'm going to show you, I'm going to change my focus from Brad to Donna, and I'll show you what happens when I do that. So we were here, now we've changed our view so that it's Donna-centric with all her connections. And I love this. Some people hate it because they get really confused. But notice that you and one of the reasons I love this is in your average mind map, you can go way out on a branch, and it can be really hard to figure out where you came from. You kind of get out there, and you can't see the center of the diagram anymore. Well, in Personal Brain, you have the breadcrumbs down here. So we're now on Donna, we were on Brad, we were on Bill before that, and on the Institute Director before that. But up here, up here, these are the breadcrumbs down here. Up here, we have what are called pins, and you choose those yourself. Since a network map doesn't need to have a center or a top, you choose those nodes that you want, or that you would go to most frequently, that you would use to orient yourself in the map. And you can change those at any time. It's very easy to do. So those are some of the chief ways of reorienting yourself. And there are ways using the view function to give yourself different views. For example, if you want to use this to make a presentation, or if you want to show a view from left to right instead of in this rotating node fashion. Okay, as time is getting a bit short, I'm going to speed this up. My next type was concept mappers. And concept mappers, like network mappers, can have connections going every which way, multiple parents, lateral connections, and they do tend to get a bit messy. They are different from what you just saw in Personal Brain because you can label each connecting line as to what kind of connection it is. So for example, one line could be labeled that node X is an example of node Y, or it supports node Y. And so that adds a level of specification of the relationships. And now I'm going on, I actually don't use any of those programs. They're mainly developed at universities, and CMAP and View are examples of those, and you have them in the reference list, and Sarah has also put up the links here. What I do use, however, is issue mappers. Compendium is an example, and they are different from other programs, knowledge mappers that we have seen, in that they use icons to expose the logic of an argument. And so what you're doing here is typically you are working through a paper, a report, a legal case, a policy discussion, and you are following issues. So for example, if you're in a strategic planning task force, which meets every 2 weeks, instead of taking minutes by date, you can use an issue mapper to follow the different issues that you were discussing, which once you're used to it is just an amazingly useful shift of perspective. So in an issue mapper, typically you will start with an open-ended question, such as a question like, what should we do about whatever? And ideas represented here by light bulbs, or answers, respond to the questions. You could obviously have multiple responses to a question, and then the ideas have pros and cons represented by pluses and minuses. And then these reference nodes will be supporting evidence, typically links to websites and documents, spreadsheets, articles that will give further support to ideas or to pluses and minuses. In addition to that, each node can also have a more detailed comment box. And you can have multiple pros and cons, obviously, for each idea. People who use this for project management typically use notes to assign tasks to people. Notice that this little handshake icon can be used to turn an idea into an agreement when you have come to agreement to adopt some particular course of action. And because these discussions often get quite complex, when that happens, in order to keep the interface fairly simple, you use submaps to organize discussions that are a level down in the hierarchy of the discussion. And one of the reasons I think that these are interesting for librarians in education is that these have been found to be quite useful by teachers and professors, not only because they can be used instead of outlines to help students achieve the logical organization of a paper. They are, because they are more visual than an outliner, they really help students to keep track of, for example, where they need more evidence, where they need to flesh out an argument more, where they need more balance in the points that they're making or the issues that they're discussing. But also, teachers like it because it is so easy today to cut and paste things into a paper that are not your own. But it is much harder to fake the structure and the logic of an argument. And so using these, again, instead of an outline, because they are more visual, allows teachers to accomplish at the same time having a greater confidence that the students are actually making their own arguments and writing their own papers, and also to see where the student may need some guidance in terms of beefing the paper up. And I have to say, the compendium for me is a wonderful tool for helping me plan presentations, and I no longer do this in outline form or on slides. I do this by directly opening compendium and starting to map out my argument. So we've now run through the different types of tools. I want to just very quickly go through the references. I've been talking for an hour now. There are some articles in here that I think are particularly useful. Notice that we have Harold Jarsh's blog here, the Keeping Found Things Found study, a couple other articles on here. If you are at all interested in issue mapping, I do suggest that you go and read this Wicked Problems and Social Complexity article. It's a fabulous article, and it's the first chapter of Jeff Conklin's book, well worth reading. And finally, these are links to the different tools. Chuck Fry's mind mapping software blog. If you are interested in mind mapping software, that's a good resource, but it's very business oriented. I do want to point out Vic's Compendium, which is an absolutely fabulous resource for mind mapping and other kinds of visual software. Do check this out if you have the slightest interest. And then finally, this discussion of note-taking software is on an IT website where software creators who are mostly, they do small programs, mostly shareware. But this started in 2006 as a discussion, simply a question, what do you use to take notes? And so it was a discussion of, how do you organize free-form knowledge and, information, articles, your own comments. It went on through at least 2009 very actively, and it's kind of petered off now. But there's some very, very interesting and high-quality comments and discussion in there. And it is voluminous, but it is quite well worth looking at. So that is the end. I do hope to hear from you with comments, questions, suggestions, experiences, and new tools that you find. So thank you very much for being with us, Sarah. Thank you enormously for your help with this. And that is the end.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, for coming and speaking with us today. And those of you who are listening, we do have webinars coming up on February 17th at 8 p.m., and that's going to be a presentation by Holly Freelow on the website building tool Weebly. And then there will also be 2 coming up on March 16th, and the registration information for all those 3 will be out very shortly. If you have thoughts or comments on this webinar series or for future presenters or future topics, please do let Buffy or myself know, and we will get in touch with you. Thanks very much. Bye.